Now, there's studies that go even beyond college. For example, George Barna this past year did a study on the transition between teens and 20s. Now, some of you are part of the Southern Baptist denomination. The Southern Baptists did their own study of their own kids, and they found out that 80% of their high school youth group graduates won't come back to any of their churches. 80% when they go to 80% after will never come back again. It's a study they did of their own Southern Baptist colleges. George Barna did a survey. He reported on it this past year, and Barna does kind of broader surveys, and he was trying to figure out the transition between teens and 20s, and he found that only 20% that were church. What he meant by this, highly church, very active in a church as teenagers. Only 20% were still spiritually active by age 29. Now, there's a number of factors to be brought into this. In fact, he found out that 61% were completely disengaged by their 20s. Now, this is a really interesting study because there's been a lot of stuff done about this transition between teens and 20s in the last several years. And it's really interesting. I just found this out not too long ago. Some of you probably knew this. We realize, don't we, that the word teenager didn't exist until 1940? No one used the word teenager until 1941. Now think about the transition. That was in the 1940s. In the 50s, you had the Beatles and Elvis Presley, well, into the 60s, right? And then you had the automobile going to every family. You know what that created? Those three things? Adolescence. Adolescence didn't exist before U.S. culture in the 1950s. There was no, because in every other culture, you transition from being a kid to being a what? An adult. We've added this middle stage called adolescence. Now let's be real honest and look at our culture. This is pretty intriguing because not only has adolescence become a transition, now, and we've added this transitional stage between being a kid and being an adult, and it's harder for kids to be adults than ever before. In fact, this spawned a whole new sociological study called the quarter-life crisis. Two 20-something sociology students graduated from college with a master's degree in sociology, figured out they were miserable, and decided to put it into a book and make a lot of money. So they wrote a book called The Quarter-Life Crisis, published a website, quarterlifecrisis.com. It's got over 80,000 registered users across the U.S. and around the world of 20-something saying, I've got a great job, I've got a great degree, I've got great money, and I'm miserable. Now, but it's gone further than this. Think about this. This hit me this year when I was watching the movie Amazing Grace. Kind of a strange thing to hit me from Amazing Grace, but follow me. Here you have Wilberforce, who was the youngest parliamentarian in British history, right? William Pitt, who was the youngest prime minister in British history. And every time they went to Parliament or they went out in public, what did they put on their heads? Wigs of gray hair. They put on gray hair. Have times changed just a little bit, right? Now, what's the point of putting on gray hair? Yeah, you look older and mature. Now, here's what's interesting. So we've added this stage called adolescence. And so you go from being a kid to being, instead of going from a kid to being an adult, you go from a kid through adolescence to being an adult. And now that transition to adulthood is harder than ever before. And that's being demonstrated across the board from a number of sources. But not only that, let's be honest. If you watched the Super Bowl commercials yesterday, you saw this. Adolescence is no longer a stage in life. Adolescence has become the ideal life. Now the goal of life is to be a perpetual adolescent. In fact, we want little kids to grow up fast, and we want old people to grow younger. You see what I mean? This has become, how you doing? This has become kind of the stage of life. So this transition to adulthood, both within the Christian community and outside of the Christian community, is a pretty big struggle. Now, here's what we want to look at now then. Why is this happening? We talked about what's happening. Why is this happening? And I want to walk through a number of reasons, specifically as it applies to that transition for Christian students. And these aren't isolated reasons. They're a mix of biblical, cultural, sociological analyses, and hopefully they'll make sense. Now, listen, let me just say this too. I know it's kind of a tight room and all of that, and I'm a talking head. I realize that I stand up and I just go, you know. And you may feel, and I'm a fast talking Southerner, which is a strange mix. So I realize that if you want to stop and say, hey, wait a minute, clarify that, ask a question, throw a pencil, anything like that, just go ahead and feel free to do that, and let's talk about this, because I want to just hit a couple of reasons here. Here's the first one: students don't know who to trust. Students don't know who to trust. Now, let me flesh this out just a little bit. as historians and sociologists analyze different periods of history, they give them names, right? So you have the age of the Enlightenment, the age of industrialization, the age of exploration. What's today's age? What's it been identified as? The information age, sure. Now, why is it called the information age? Well, because of this. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Now, here's what we need to understand. It's shocking to us the amount of information that we have to deal with. I mean, some of you have been in your industry for so many years. You've seen the astronomical growth of information that you have to wrestle with just within your industry. Now, here's what we need to realize. Students don't know any different. They're like the fish that don't know they're wet. They haven't seen the transition. We did not have email at Bryan College when I was a sophomore there. I'm not that old. I'm only 45. No, I'm not kidding. I'm not even that old. I'm 32. We did not have email there. Do you realize that? This has just taken off. When we say we live in the age of information, this is what we're talking about. Our students, every time they get on the computer, have at their fingertips more information than all the previous centuries of the world combined. You go on a 10-hour drive. You go on a 45-minute drive across the city of Orlando, and you'll encounter more information on that drive than someone who lived in the 1500s or 1200s would have ever seen during their entire life. And our students don't realize how drastic this is. Because they're like, it's the old Chinese proverb. If you want to know what water is, you don't ask the fish, right? Because fish don't realize this. And I know students don't get this because I used that analogy with students a couple years ago at some school. And I said, why wouldn't you ask the fish? And they said, because fish can't talk. I said, thanks. That's not helpful at all. But of course, here's what we need to understand. No information is neutral. No information is neutral. Information contains, convinces, embodies, teaches ideas. And ideas have consequences. Good ideas have good consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences. Information embodies ideas. So here we have this flow of information that's coming at our students at an unparalleled rate. What's the great thing that they need in their life? In this flow of information, some of it's true, some of it's false, some of it's genuine, some of it's counterfeit, some of it's on the truth, some of it's lying to them, some of it's looking out for them, some of it's trying to sell them something. What do they need more than anything else in a world of information? Wisdom. Now listen, wisdom and discernment, I see those, by the way, it's the same thing. Now, see, our initial impression as Christians is to say we need to give them truth. Now, good heavens, let's not stop giving them truth. But if you just dump true information in a sea of information, what happens to that true information? It just gets lost. We are one stop in the information bus of their life. And there's a lot of stops. They just don't need truth. They need to be able to tell the difference between truth and not truth. They've got to be able to tell the difference between genuine and counterfeit. They need discernment. In fact, I'll give you an example of this. I was speaking down in Atlanta at one of the larger churches down there. I was going to do a parent seminar on entertainment. So that morning I sat through the service. This was on a Sunday night. The morning I sat through the service. And the pastor really gave a good message about why to go to church. And it wasn't anything about tithing, which was good. It was like, you should actually go to church because, when you're saved, God puts you in his family. And this isn't just a redemptive thing. It goes back to what it means to be a human being, which is the part I really like about the sermon. God's made, God is a Trinity. We're made, so he's a relational God by nature, not by choice, but by nature, actually by definition. So we're made in his image. We're relational too. You need other people. That night I threw up this illustration of a popular song called The Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day. Now, it was the most popular non-R&B song of about 3.5 years ago. And this is what it said. I walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. I don't know where it goes, but it's home to me, and I walk how? Alone. I walk this empty street on the Boulevard of Broken Dreams where the city sleeps, and I'm the only one, and I walk alone. My shadow's the only one that walks beside me. My shallow heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone out there will find me. Until then, I walk alone. In other words, the point of the song is essentially, what does it mean to be human? Is to be what? Alone. And I thought, how ironic is this? We sat through this service this morning. He told us that what it means to be human is to be relational. How many people walked out of the service, got into their cars, started the car. The first thing that came on was the radio. They were playing this ad nauseum at this point in culture. And so they heard 3 minutes later that what it means to be human is to be all alone. So they heard completely contradictory information. about what it means to be human in a matter of 3 minutes.